So we shall make a start this morning. We're waiting for the chairman, who is also just about 10 minutes stuck at number 2 on his way here, but we shall start. Thank you for your patience this morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the board of the commission, the chairman, distinguished guests this morning, on behalf of the board and the chairman, to welcome you all to this symposium on virtual assets. Firstly, before we start, as is always the case in this country, as a Christian country, we invite Mr. Alan Obed to say an opening prayer. Thank you.
Let us bow our head in prayer. Our Father, which is in heaven, in this beautiful morning, we say thank you for taking care of us. We left our families at home. We came to discuss important issues about business in Vanuatu, Lord. Without you, we cannot proceed further, as our lives depend upon you. Lord, we pray, give us wisdom to discuss more and more deep. Give us critical mind how we can resolve issues regarding virtual assets. And we pray, Lord, as we continue to discuss, we recognize that we are not worthy in your presence. Please forgive us for our trespasses and bless us this morning. We pray for Christ's sake.
I will now invite the Commissioner of the Vanuatu Financial Services Commission, Mr. Brandon Karai, to give his opening remarks.
Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Management, Mr. John Salun Damasing, Honorable Minister of Climate Change, Ralph Rekenwanu, I believe he's not in the country, perhaps his representative is here. Honorable Member of Parliament and Director of Vanuex Limited, Mr. Jesse Liu, is here with us at the front. Reserve Bank of Vanuatu Governor, Simenadi, I believe perhaps he's not here, but his representative will be here. We have the Attorney General, Mr. Arnold Kiel Lofman, Director General, Ministry of Finance and Economic Management, Mr. Letlet August, Director General, Ministry of Trade, Commerce and Industry, Mr. Chimirantas, Vanuatu Financial Service Commission Chairman of the board, Mr. Edward Nalial. The main sponsors of the event today, representatives and members of the Financial Center Association, representatives and members of the Financial Market Association, representatives from the education sector, representatives from the non-government organization, panel speakers, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all this morning to this important symposium that is organized by the Vanuatu Financial Service Commission in partnership with a number of institutions whose logos are displayed on the event banner and 1 to 2 booths that are displayed around the room this morning. I honorably welcome, in particular, the presence of the Minister of Finance and Economic Management and the Minister of Climate Change, Honorable Ralph Rekenwanu. I also extend this welcome to the keynote speaker, Ms. Loretta Patricia Joseph, who is the advisor to the Commonwealth Secretary on Virtual Asset, chair of the IDEX International Digital Asset Exchange Association, and the chair of the Australian Digital Financial Standards Council. I would also like to welcome the panel members who will be participating and leading out in the panel discussion today. I understand a number of the attendees have traveled from overseas. Of them and attendees have traveled from overseas to Vanuatu in order to take part in this event. And we welcome your commitment and effort to participate in this event today. The Commission's decision to hold this event at this time is due to a number of reasons. One of the key reasons is a lot of development has taken place within the finance sector recently and technology industry landscape over the last 3 to 4 years, particularly those areas that come directly under the registration and supervision of VFC. And we feel that it is timely and appropriate that such a symposium is organized to bring everyone together to discuss, take stock, and come up with some clear understanding and direction on the way forward that Vanuatu can take. Most importantly, for Vanuatu to benefit fully, the road ahead requires the strong collaboration between everyone. And it is very important that such an event is organized to harness this. The presentation and discussion today will cover a few important topics that are very, very important and of interest to many today. I can see that from everyone's presence today. The first one, which is the core of the focus, covers the future assets business. Vanuatu, like many jurisdictions around the globe today, have witnessed the growth and interest in this new area of business. And the government of Vanuatu has shown a strong interest in supporting and growing this business within the right framework. The efforts are noted in a number of areas. This includes consulting widely, both locally and internationally, and providing support to a number of initiatives that they established over the last few years. One of these that transpired at the start was the establishment of the Distribution Ledger Task Force Committee that is chaired by the Vanuatu Financial Service Commission. The members of the task force include the Reserve Bank Governor, Director General of Finance and Economic Management, the Attorney General, and the Director of FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. The meeting today and the engagement of the Digital Asset Expert Advisor Assistant is the outcome of the work which the task force is doing in partnership with the other stakeholders towards setting the right approach that the country must take as we move forward into this new area of business activities. The second focus of the deliberation today is on the growth of the financial dealers license business in Vanuatu. This is also a very attractive business activity that is gaining a lot of attention and interest from the international market, and the Commission, in partnership with its key partners, feel that it is now the right time for the country, through the Commission, to bring everyone together and discuss the opportunities that the country can do to better position and attract more of this business to register and grow the business from Vanuatu. And as outlined in the program, attention will also focus on the Personal Property Security Register, the PPSR facility. We feel it is important that PPSR is included to balance the focus also on the domestic market and business environment. This is in line with the many discussion and focus of the government over the years to make funding easier and available to everyone through the accessing of the affordable security cover to support the small and growing business setup that form the foundation of the economy of a country, I'd say Vanuatu. We believe that the potential out there is vast, and better awareness and the full utilization of these facilities and others that exist will really help the country to move forward and to take full advantage of these arrangements. Vanuatu's economy and growth performance of the last years continues to face a lot of challenges. However, strong opportunities are also emerging from this experience, showing that with the right focus and direction, Vanuatu can benefit from this experience and move forward. I end my opening remarks here, and again welcome you all, and thank you for your attending this symposium today. Thank you.
Thank the Commissioner for the speech this morning. We also privileged to welcome the Chairman of the Vanuatu Financial Service Commission Board, Mr. Edward Naniel, and I have the pleasure to invite him now to make his opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning to all. Honorable John Salong Damasing MP, Minister of Finance and Economic Management, Member of Parliament and Director of Vanuex Limited, Honorable Jesse Lowo MP, Governor of the Reserve Bank, Mr. Simeon Athi, the Attorney General, Mr. Kiel Lofman, Director General, Ministry of Finance and Economic Management, Mr. Letlet August, Director General, Ministry of Trades, Commerce and Industry, Mr. Jimmy Rantes, Advisor to Commonwealth Secretariat on Virtual Assets, Ms. Loretta Patricia Joseph, board members of the Vanuatu Financial Services Commission, the Commissioner of the VFSC, Mr. Brandon Garai, representatives from the Finance Center, representatives from the Chamber of Commerce, the main sponsors of today's symposium, representatives from the education sector, representatives from the non-government organizations, panel speakers, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. As chairman of the VFC board, I am pleased to take part in this important symposium, and I take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you to this special event today. VFC operations have progressed significantly over the years. This is measured by a number of areas and achievements. Every year, the Commission contributes roughly 250 million to 300 million Vatu into the government's fiscal budget, and the Commission continues to remain one of the key statutory bodies that supports the government's finance and revenue collections. In carrying out its roles, the Commission has also contributed effectively to the promotion and growth of business activities in Vanuatu and the safe protection of the Vanuatu Finance Center image within the international arena. VFSC sub-office presence was established in Hong Kong some years back, and recently the Commission has established an office in Dubai. It is the Commission's focus to continue to explore and expand its connections and setups throughout the globe under the right conditions and strategic locations. Within the local market, over the last 3+ years, the Commission has extended its services throughout the country through the partnership joint presence office arrangement that is able to establish within the provinces of Tafea, Malamba, Sanma, Penama, and soon the same partnership and joint presence office arrangement in Toba province. At this point, let me acknowledge the presence of the Sanma and Tafea Province Secretary Generals, and who I am aware that are present with us today. Thank you for your partnership and support. I also acknowledge the presence of the other provincial SGs. These achievements and more to come in future are attributed to a number of factors. One of the main reasons is through the dedication and the commitment of a strong VFC board, which is committed to working closely with the government, the management and the staff of the Commission in tapping into the new areas of business opportunities and taking on the challenges that come with them. This is not an easy task given the scope of work that the Commission covers, and I take this opportunity to acknowledge the good work and the support of the past VFSC boards and the Commission under the strong leadership of the current Commissioner, Mr. Garai, and his management team. A big part of the reason is also attributed to the strong and close working relationships that the Commission has and continues to establish within the government through the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management and the other government's key ministries and agencies, the members of the Vanuatu Finance Center industry, and the other key stakeholders within the economy. This relationship is very important and is reflected in the symposium's attendance today and the resource mobilization support, which is provided by the government and industry members towards this event. The road traveled over the years has come with a lot of challenges, and the Commission will continue to take up the challenges and move forward. It is the board's role to continue to support the Commission through the setting up of the right strategic direction for the Commission to take. One of these, amongst many, is ensuring that the Commission's infrastructures are modernized and the operations of the Commission are housed in a secure, safe, and modern building that are able to support the future expansion and operations of the Commission. This strategy is also important towards the Commission's deliverance of a high standard of services to its clients, and more importantly, a good promotion and showcase of the Vanuatu Finance Center image within local and overseas market. On that point, I am delighted to confirm that the board, with the support of the VFSC management, has in the last 2 years refurbished the VFSC Santo office to a modern office and increased the awareness and visibility of VFSC on Santo through new and obvious signage. Customers and visitors to Luganville Santo with the opportunity to visit the office will confirm the nice environment and setup of the office there. The impact of this upgrade on visibility is very good, and the Commission is happy to contribute in this way towards the building of the business confidence and growth in the northern part of the country. More exciting to report on is the board, with the support of the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Management, has begun the planning for a new VVC building in Port Vila City. The concept design stage is nearing completion, and a portrait of the building is hereby displayed on the screen for everyone's viewing. The hard copy of the concept design is displayed beside the stage for everyone's viewing if they wish to do so during the symposium. If all goes according to plan, the Commission expects work to commence on the construction of this new building in mid-2024. Other key areas of attention and strategic strengthening that are focused on includes enhancing the Commission's official image and logo brand, modernization of the IT systems, security controls, continuous upgrading of the Commission's capacity, and more. To stay ahead and be competitive, the Commission must continue to review its products line and come up with new ones at all times. This requires critical thinking and bold decisions to take. In this regard, I am pleased to know the presence of everyone who are gathered here today to review the performances of some of the Commission's exciting products and focus more attention on the virtual assets business. The new initiative that the VFSC is moving forward with the support of the government and the industry at large. The virtual assets business is gaining popularity around the world. Many people are wary of these new business items, while others are eager to consider and invest in them. It is obvious that these developments are inevitable, whether we like them or not, but the crucial option to take is to be accommodating while maintaining and adopting sound and proper business approach at all times. This requires coming up with the right legal framework to properly administer these business activities and complying with the appropriate international standards at all times. I will end my speech here by taking this time again to thank the government for its tremendous support from day one, through the office of the Right Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Minister of Finance. I also wish to express a special thank you to the main sponsors of today's event. First, TGM, the gold sponsor, and the rest of the sponsors, namely Primus Limited, Deriv, Financial Markets Association, Finance Center Association, AJC, Titan FX, Explore Global, and again the Ministry of Finance, Economic Management, and the Reserve Bank of Vanuatu. Thank you all for your kindness and generosity. I wish everyone the best and look forward to a productive conference. Thank you.
We thank the Chairman for the speech this morning. I now invite the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Management, Mr. Chon Salong Tamasing, to give his official speech. Thank you.
Good morning. Member of Parliament, Mr. Jesuluo mo Director Blo Vanoa X Limited, Governor Blo Reserve Bank, Mr. Simeon Atis, Posino Staff, Representative Lam, Chairman and Board of the Vanuatu Financial Service Commission, the Commissioner of the FSC, Mr. Brandon Karai, Director General of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management, Mr. Ledled August, Attorney General, Mr. Arnold K. Loffman, Director General of the Ministry of Trade and Commerce and Industry, Mr. Chimirantis, Vanuatu National University Vice Chancellor, Mr. Jean-Pierre Nirua, Chief Executive Officer, Utilities Regulatory Authority, Mr. Paul Cowan, Chief Executive Officer, Vanuatu Post Limited, Mr. Vira Timbagi, Country Director, Credit Corporation Vanuatu Limited, Mr. Nitya Nand, Ms. Loretta Patricia Joseph, Advisor to the Commonwealth Secretariat on Virtual Assets, representatives from the Financial Center, the sponsors of today's symposium, TGM, Deriv, AJC, FCA, FMA, Titan FX, Explore Global, RPV, MFM, and Primus, representatives from the industry, representatives from the education sector, representatives from the non-government organizations, Sanma and Tafea SGs, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be part of this symposium being organized by the Financial Service Commission, FFSC, and to make this speech today. I am pleased to see the high interest in this event, and I join the Master of Ceremony in welcoming the members of the FFSC Vanuatu Financial Center Association and the Vanuatu Financial Market Association, and everyone that has responded positively and are here today to take part in this very important symposium. I understand this symposium is the first of its kind to be organized by FFSC, and I commend the Commission for such an initiative. Just give them a good round of applause. First of such event because it brings everyone together to listen and deliberate over a number of existing and new product initiatives that the Commission is spearheading with the support of the government, the industry, and the stakeholders. The main area of focus today is around virtual assets business activities, which is captured in the theme of the symposium. With the appropriate legal framework and the will to move ahead, Vanuatu could be ranked amongst the first countries in the world, and more specifically within the Pacific region, to move ahead with the implementation of the digital asset business under a well-regulated framework and standards. I understand that the VFSC had also been instrumental in other such successful government initiatives in the past, such as the Permanent Residency Program and the Citizenship by Investment programs. As such, the VFSC is considered a vital institution in Vanuatu. And you have just heard how much they contribute to the government budget annually, and I commend you for the work, and I expect you to keep up the good work. And the government will continue to partner and provide the necessary support to the VFSC as and when needed. To set the stage, it is appropriate that we take a look at the brief overview of the economic situation of the country post-COVID-19 and the challenges that lie ahead for Vanuatu. Vanuatu's economic growth is gradually returning with the opening of the borders and the resumption of major projects implementation. Vanuatu managed the pandemic well, despite the significant loss of economic activity that we all know about, recorded from the tourism and other key sectors during the lockdowns. This is achieved by the authorities' success in identifying alternative sources of revenue, remittance, and reprofiling of expenditures. However, the key structural vulnerabilities related to climate change, limited infrastructure development capacity, and weak governance remains critical to the country's future growth and overall performance. Vanuatu remains extremely vulnerable to climate change and the other natural disasters, and implementation of critical infrastructure projects is affected by limited domestic capacity and often cost and time overruns. In addition, weak governance and transparency in managing state-owned enterprises has led to the realization of fiscal risks. The pandemic and the surging of commodity prices following the sanctions that stem from the Russia-Ukraine war have reduced macroeconomic policy buffers and aggravated structural vulnerabilities. Bold reforms are needed to build climate-resilient infrastructure containing ballooning deficits, strengthening the banking system, and to resolve the labor supply shortages, address governance and corruption in the economy and services sector, particularly accommodation, have been hit hard. The direct impact of Russia and Ukraine war on Vanuatu's economy is contained because of limited economic and financial ties, but Vanuatu is indirectly affected through the higher imported inflation and also potential slowdown in the trading partners. In November 2022, a ransomware cyber attack severely disrupted the core IT infrastructure of many government agencies, affecting statistical data collection and dissemination. Since 2022, the European Union have identified weaknesses in the Citizenship Development Support Program, including deficiencies in due diligence screening of applicants, and the issuance of temporary suspension of visa waiver agreements for recently issued Vanuatu passports. This triggered a decline in revenue collected from the scheme and adding to government concerns. In February 2023 until August 2024, we are expecting that the European Union has extended the giving of authorities more time to implement the required reforms. The struggle is far from over, but the country is moving forward and revenue sources must be identified to support government's programs and continue to place Vanuatu at the competitive edge within the Pacific Island region and the global stage. In this regard, I take this opportunity to acknowledge the contributions of the Vanuatu Financial Service Finance Center to the economy of Vanuatu over the years, and leave this message and challenge today to the symposium participants, the VFCA and the VFSC. The Finance Center was established by the British government in the early 1970s, along with many others around the globe to raise government revenues. The VFSC was established by the Vanuatu government after independence to regulate all offshore businesses for over 30 years. Businesses flourished, and the VFSC was second only to the Customs Department in its contribution to government revenues. However, post 9/11, the case has taken a turn for the worse for zero-rated or direct taxes countries such as Vanuatu. International organizations such as FATF, OECD, IMF, World Bank, and the EU tightened their grips on monetary money laundering, terrorist financing, among other things, and this has affected Vanuatu greatly. This is noted hugely on the international payment transmission mechanisms, with many countries facing difficulties in remitting and transacting in foreign currency transactions. This development has challenged many countries and people around the globe to explore new ways of payment methods and systems that are safer, efficient, and easier to protect and meet their interests. The rise in the virtual assets and the payment transaction results from this development, and this business activity, amongst others, is growing and showing a lot of interest within the global arena. I understand that the virtual asset is a digital currency such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other digital assets which can be digitally traded, transferred, or used for payments bypassing normal banking systems. Virtual assets have many potential benefits and also many dangers. Therefore, an appropriate legal and supervisory and regulatory framework and technological infrastructure should be in place before allowing for virtual assets to be used. I understand the VFSC has engaged a consultant, Ms. Loretta Joseph, who is specialized in this area. We therefore are thankful for Ms. Joseph to come to Vanuatu and to lead out in the presentation today to assist in the work that is required. As the VFSC has in the past spearheaded a number of government revenue initiatives successfully, the government will support the Virtual Asset Initiative and likewise seek the support of everyone in this overall effort. And of course, the launch of the digital national payment systems spearheaded by the Reserve Bank of Vanuatu for real-time and more efficient payments will also contribute to strengthening the technological infrastructure that is necessary. It would be most helpful if this system could be extended to include cross-border payments and remittance throughout the Pacific region. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have not bored you too much, but provided you with some insight into some of the priorities of the government in this area, and look forward to everyone's support as we work through this. With these remarks, I now declare the symposium officially open, with everyone a successful deliberation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Management, for the speech and the launching of the symposium. At this stage, we have all heard about Loretta Joseph, who is present with us today. I shall now invite her to come in front to do her presentation. And of course, we have co-speakers, Commissioner and the Reserve Bank. Of course, the Attorney General here is here to assist with any queries. So without further ado, I would like to ask Loretta Joseph to do her presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Honourable Ministers, Members of Parliament, the Chair of the Board of the Vanuatu Financial Services Commission, the Commissioner, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me. And it's an interesting topic we're going to talk about this morning. So just a bit of a background on myself. I've been in this space for a decade now. I started writing policy in 2014. In my past life, I was a banker, a derivatives trader. I've run a couple of global banks in other countries around the world out of Australia, which I'm native of, as you can't tell from my accent. But I started writing policy and regulatory frameworks around this interesting asset class from about 2014, when I set up the first ever industry body in Australia to look at how we could interact with policy and government for something that hadn't been around before. And I wrote the first ever, I helped write it, first ever legislative framework in Bermuda at the end of 2018. We wrote the first ever legislation on initial coin offerings, which at the time were just like a digital business offering, I guess. And that stopped a lot of the scams that we were seeing in the space. Since then, I've worked with a number of jurisdictions writing legal and regulatory frameworks. I am now the consultant to the Commonwealth Secretariat. We, as the Commonwealth, have decided that a harmonious and globalised framework would suit a third of the world's population, of which Vanuatu is one of the members of the Commonwealth. And it probably isn't going to come out of Europe, or it certainly isn't going to be coming out of the US anytime soon. So we need to address the elephant in the room, digital assets, and they're here to stay. So my first slide, I don't know who's got the clicker. Who's got the clicker? Oh, it's there, okay. All right. So we've had an increased adoption in global assets around the globe. As the global market of these assets start to increase into the trillions of dollars, you've probably all heard of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and things called cryptocurrencies. But they're just one of a very, very small asset now in this new asset class. So when I first started to write legislative frameworks around digital assets, and we'll get into this in a minute, because you hear often people talk about a digital asset, you hear other people talk about a virtual asset, you hear about a crypto asset, you hear about a cryptocurrency. What are they? They're very confusing in their terminology at the moment. So I would say to you that a digital asset is a new asset class. I'm very excited to live in an age where I've seen the birth of an asset class. It's just a digital representation of any asset, tangible or non-tangible. So, yeah, a digital asset can be a security. It can be a fixed income product. It can be a commodity. It can be a land title. We now have this ability to digitally represent anything of value that is tangible or intangible. A subset of that, I would say to you, is a cryptocurrency. And I'll get into a bit of the standard terminology we start when we look at these subsets of what digital assets are. But that's what a digital asset is. It's a new asset class, and it's only come about because we have technology. We have the internet. So I would say to you that blockchain technology, which saw the inception of something called Bitcoin, which was the first ever digital asset, came about in 2009. So blockchain technology is just a fancy word for a database. We all use databases every single day of our lives. But this particular database, the blockchain database, is what we call decentralised. So nobody controls that database. It's open, it's secure. Anybody can access it from having a computer or a mobile device. It's immutable, and the Bitcoin blockchain was the first ever to come along. That was in 2009, and it was created by somebody called Satoshi Nakamoto, who we don't know. We think is a group of people, but it was meant to be a cashless peer-to-peer system. So this asset class became very relevant from about probably 2013. I got into blockchain myself in 2013, but I didn't look at it from the point of view of a cryptocurrency. I was an equity trader, a fixed income trader. And when I looked at this technology, blockchain technology, the thing that excited me the most is that we could all of a sudden start to atomically swap assets with this new technology. So I looked at how markets, and many of you are market operators in here, so the biggest pain points I think we have in markets around the world is post-trade. So the settlement, clearing, all those things that can take for an equity 2 days, for a fixed income product 4 days. If you ever trade water entitlements, that can take you a month. Why? Because we have very archaic systems in financial markets. So when blockchain came into existence, we could atomically swap assets, so it took out all the post-trade risks of trading any sort of asset. So that was my first introduction, not really through Bitcoin. And so I've explored this technology for a long time. So it's been around. People weren't particularly excited about virtual assets or digital assets, as we call them, until probably around 2016-17, when we saw the first rise of one of the cryptocurrencies called Bitcoin. Now that spurred regulators around the world to start to get very, very worried. They weren't worried about this asset class prior to 2016 because it wasn't infiltrating markets particularly. Can you just go back to that other slide for a sec? So when we look at global regulation, we look at it in 3 buckets. And I think the most important is for AML-CTF. So in 2019, a group, the Standard Centre for Money Laundering, Terrorism and Financing, called the Financial Action Task Force, got very, very worried about this new asset class. So as I said to you before, there was people talking about cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, digital assets. The Financial Action Task Force was the first of the standard bodies to come out with a definition of what they were talking about. So they define a virtual asset as a digital representation that can be traded, transferred, or used as a unit of payment or an investment purpose. So they're very specific about a virtual asset. They came out in 2019. They have a list of recommendations. I think in total there's 40, which all countries around the world must adhere to for anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism financing, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So they came out and said, we're worried about this asset class. We're now going to put into our recommendations what jurisdictions must do around virtual assets. So from recommendation 1, I think 10, recommendation 15 and 16 and 21 are the recommendations that, I'll move over here a bit, that pertain particularly to virtual assets, and they clarify that the standards to virtual assets and virtual assets providers, what must be done. So if you're an operator in the space now and you're a virtual asset service provider, you have to comply with AML-CTF recommendations. So as countries go, the FATF have been a little bit, they're getting a little bit annoyed that countries haven't taken up what they've said that all jurisdictions must do to stop money laundering and terrorism financing. And many countries who haven't done inherent risk assessments of what the virtual asset impact on your jurisdiction is going to look like have ended up on the grey list. Now, the FATF is probably the biggest of all the buckets of regulators we have in the world, because none of us want to see terrorists blow people up, none of us want to see kids trafficked, and none of us want to see drug traffickers make money. So as countries and jurisdictions, we must adhere to the FATF standards, and we must adhere to them when it comes to the new world of virtual assets. I've been working with the Commission, and some of you might find this as a surprise. We've been working on this for 3 years. The Commission and the staff members I commend and I thank very much. They have a very deep understanding of what we need to comply with, and one of the first things we did was an inherent risk assessment of what virtual assets would look like in Vanuatu back in 2021. So we haven't just got on this journey as the Commission. The FATF also states that all jurisdictions must licence and register all virtual asset service service providers in that jurisdiction for the purposes of AML-CTF. Now, the supervisors of this function in most countries falls under either the Central Bank or the Securities Commission. In the case of Vanuatu, the licensing and registration will fall under the Financial Services Commission. So everybody that wants to operate a virtual asset service business in Vanuatu must be licensed and registered with the Commission. So there's many preventative measures that they take. If you're interested, I would suggest to you, if you are looking to be a VASP, a virtual asset service provider, you look at recommendation 15 and 16 of the FATF recommendations, because they're certainly the most stringent around virtual asset service providers. Recommendation 15 particularly because it says that you have to do a slew of compliance objectives to meet your obligations to the FATF and to your jurisdiction. So it's compliance. KYC, know your customer, you must do your compliance checks, you must do audits, all the things that you normally do in good governance. Recommendation 16 is particularly interesting because it now says, like we're all familiar with the SWIFT system. So under the banking system, when I send money from myself, say, to the Commissioner, the bank knows exactly who I am, and my bank knows who I am, and the Commissioner's bank knows who he is. So the FATF said, we're going to take out the anonymity of these cryptocurrencies because they are fueling money laundering and terrorism financing. So recommendation 16, which needs to be implemented across the world by all member countries of the FATF and observer countries, says that if I'm an exchange operating in Australia and I'm sending a Bitcoin to the Commissioner in Vanuatu, to an exchange operating in Vanuatu, both exchanges must know the beneficial owner of that wallet and the beneficial receiver. So this is a mandatory global standard that is being implemented, and it's recommendation 16 called the travel rule. Its implementation of the travel rule has been quite convoluted over the last couple of years because we're dealing with an industry that are technologists, and technologists are generally not policy writers, and policy writers are generally not technologists. So we've had this asset class that is sort of just, is probably the most exciting thing we've all seen since the internet, and there's been a miscommunication between the virtual asset service providers and the standard setters. But there's a number of solutions, and as technologists go, we can build any solution. But recommendation 16 is becoming a little bit tricky because the interoperability of some of these databases, talking to each other, understanding who your customers are, making sure that you understand your requirements is quite difficult for a number of businesses in the virtual asset space that are not used to being regulated. FATF is the digital representation of value that can be traded, transferred and be used for payment or investment purposes. That sort of, in essence, I guess, sums up what a cryptocurrency is. And I'll just go one step further, saying that a cryptocurrency is not actually a currency. I think when the Bitcoin guys came into existence, they started to borrow terms from everywhere so they'd get recognition, I guess, that maybe they were compliant in some way. Bitcoin, in the first ever court case that was held in the world, was defined as a commodity. It actually is a barter system. So cryptocurrencies as such are not currencies at all. No cryptocurrency in the world fulfills the legal definition of fiat currency, as in I'm saying what is written on a piece of paper that we transact as countries in. No cryptocurrency in the world fulfills all the legal obligations of what defines fiat currency. Bitcoin might be a store of value. Ethereum and may be used as a means of payments, but there is no cryptocurrency to date that actually is anywhere near legal tender. So countries that I write law in, we say this is a commodity, and it comes under the eyes of whoever regulates the commodities. So then we move on to the next regulating bunch, I guess, and that is the regulators of consumer and investor protection and fraud. Generally, that sits under the Financial Services Commission of a country, the securities regulator. So they look after investor, consumer and protection and fraud. And then central banks generally look after financial stability. So in the last couple of years, IOSCO, who's the standard setter, like the FATF does AML/CTF, IOSCO is the security standard setter. So they manage globally, how do we manage and protect customers. So this new asset class, and they refer especially to digital assets, because under a digital asset, if you're a security, there's already law around a security, so you're just a digital security. If you're a commodity, you're a commodity. If you're a fixed income product, you will come under the securities regulator. Many cryptocurrency projects or digital asset projects have tried to squeeze their way around this regulation, saying, no, we're not a security. But if you launch a project that uses a cryptocurrency or a token with the intention of making that investment to make a profit, you are going to be a security. The SEC in the US has been very, very harsh on this in the last couple of years. They've particularly come down hard in the last few months on people operating these projects and saying they're not securities, but actually that actually are securities and they're being prosecuted. So I take particular aware of when I was looking to set up a project to make sure that you are regulated by the proper regulator. There's a test in the US called the Howey test. It was a court case back in 1946 which involved an orange grove being fractionalised and sold off to a number of investors for the intention of making profit. So the SEC was the first securities regulator in the world to take this example and say that if they saw projects in digital assets or were for investment purposes to make a profit, then you were going to be under securities law. Then the third body of regulators is what we call the Financial Stability Board. The Financial Stability Board was created after the GFC in 2009 to keep financial stability under control. They're the newest of the standard setters to come in with recommendations around what they refer to as crypto assets. So I guess for the last few years I've spent a great time of my life trying to get the standard setters to talk, because it's very difficult when you don't have harmonised definitions around this asset class. It's very difficult for an industry to comply with when they think they're compliant with one law that talks about virtual assets, another law that's talking about digital assets, and another one that's talking about crypto assets. So I'm working on a taxonomy of terms to go across all the standard setters, so at least we can have some global standardisation and a level playing field, because we're seeing a lot of jurisdictional arbitrage at the moment around the world, which is concerning. Companies are setting up in countries with very low or light regulatory touches, and I think as companies you've got to look at very careful doing that, because if you don't have legal certainty and a proper framework in place, it's going to be very hard to pilot your businesses to other jurisdictions. So it's been very, very difficult with jurisdictional arbitrage and the definitions of each standard setters. But the Financial Stability Board in the last year, and I'm one of I'm on the consultative process of the Financial Stability Board. They've become very concerned about the growth of this asset class, but not because of things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. When I wrote law around Bitcoin, Ethereum, other cryptocurrencies and ICOs in 2017, my life was pretty simple. But move on now with technology and innovation to 2023, Bitcoin is the least of my worries. I don't know if anyone saw yesterday, but 3 of the biggest hedge funds in the world have decided now to launch an institutional exchange, which will now push all exchanges to be very highly regulated by securities regulators. I think that's a very good thing for this industry to go mainstream, but it's going to bring much more regulatory clarity and certainty, but a lot more regulatory oversight to the space. But in the last, probably since COVID, the innovation that we see in this ecosystem is unsurpassed by the creation of the internet. And with the internet, we could start to transfer information across open systems. The man that built the internet was a man called Bob Kahn. Bob's been my mentor. He wrote the Transmission Control Protocol and the Internet Protocol. He's been my mentor in open systems since 2014, because I had to learn to code, because you can't write law if you don't understand this technology. You have to have a deep, deep understanding of the technology and what it can do. So moving from 2017 to now, my biggest problem has got nothing to do with the cryptocurrency. There's things called non-fungible tokens which have come out. Fungibility is an issue, and I'll get into that. So a non-fungible token, I guess, is gives you the digital uniqueness to owning something. Anything can be a non-fungible token. If people collect cards, or you might collect stamps, what we used to do before we had technology, they give you a digital version of that and rights attached to owning something, digital rights, but that can be verified on a blockchain. So they're very interesting. But then we have DAOs. They're decentralised autonomous organisations, which are a new type of structure which there's no board of directors. These new company structures are now controlled by code. So if anything goes wrong, the regulator can't go into the board of the directors and blame them. It's a piece of code. So at the moment, regulators are working very, very hard around the world to write regulatory frameworks around these new DAOs, these structures, because they're going to become very, very convoluted in courts of law, because we can't take code into law. I think we'll probably end up having sort of a limited liability company structure put over these new DAOs. And then we have things called stable coins. So in the world of the cryptocurrencies, the Bitcoins, Ethereum, these new assets are very volatile. They're very, very speculative. And that's why regulators have been very worried about them. So I think in the case of the cryptocurrencies, the best thing for regulators to do, because we can't regulate technology, and nor should we. I have a 19-year-old that has a phone in her right hand almost 24 hours a day. Our children and the next generations are growing up in this digital age, and it's a very different age to when I grew up. I can't stop her using technology, but I can say to her, buyer beware. If you invest in these very speculative, very, very, very volatile assets, you may lose everything. As a trader, I've traded markets for over 35 years. No one asset class goes one way forever. So security regulators have been very worried about the consumer and investor protection part of these things. But in the last couple of years, stable coins have come into existence. Now, a stable coin is an asset-backed cryptocurrency. So usually they're one-to-one backed by the US dollar, or they're backed by gold. They have a stable base. Now, these things have become very interesting because they're not as speculative or volatile as cryptocurrencies, but we've seen in the last 18 months the lack of regulation has seen lots of money disappear through the non-compliance of stablecoins. So the FSB have come out and said that prudential regulators must start to look at these things as we would a deposit note. So have basic prudential regulation and oversight into how these stable assets work. And I think that'll be a prudential regulator oversight, not so much as securities regulator oversight. And then there's another interesting, I guess, progression of this industry over the last couple of years. We've seen the emergence of something called decentralised finance, DeFi. You might have heard of DeFi in some circles, you may not have. So DeFi is essentially peer-to-peer banking. We can now, as people, do every function that a bank does: borrow, lend, arbitrate, do derivatives on as people. All you need is access to a mobile device and a digital asset. They're becoming, the world of the DeFi is very innovative and very and moving very, very fast, but regulators are very worried about this new peer-to-peer interaction. The question goes back to then, should regulators be regulating peer-to-peer? Because as general, we as regulators regulate intermediaries, but many people are losing a lot of money globally. So that's one of the main recommendations of the Financial Stability Board, and they'll come out with recommendations in the next couple of months about how we should actually regulate the world of DeFi, and how the prudential regulator should have a much better oversight into stable coins. So everything's moving very, very fast, but I guess many countries have been really struggling to implement all these rules and regulations, But there is an opportunity, and I've worked in many smaller island states, and the will to innovate is much greater than we're ever going to see, you know, even in Australia or in the US or the European Union, where we can innovate very quickly. If we have robust legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks, it's very good for jurisdictions. As I would say, you mitigate the risk and you harness the opportunities. You ensure the nefarious actors can't come into a jurisdiction. And if they do, they'll be prosecuted. But you leave enough room for innovation to not be stifled with a sensible level of regulation from all the regulators to stop the things that I just talked about. So none of us want money launderers or terrorists to be in a jurisdiction. Nobody in the industry does. And I think if you look at the industry globally, it's matured a lot over the last 10 years. When I got into it, you know, Bitcoin came out of a bunch of kids that were doing game theory, and putting them in front of a central bank governor or an attorney general or a prime minister was quite a task in 2014, 2015. And I used to have to carry around spare socks and toothbrushes in my bag just so, you know, these kids wouldn't offend people. But we've moved a lot on, and the ecosystem has really grown. As we've seen, you know, many of you probably didn't know what a digital asset was in 2018, but this asset class is now so big with over trillions of dollars, and it's becoming very mainstream. So we can't ignore it, no matter what size the jurisdiction is. We have to harness the opportunities but mitigate the risks. And then, you know, so that means with robust regulatory requirements. You can all have a look at my presentation, I'll send it to you. So licensing requirements, robust governance models, robust compliance models. You can't just, you know, go into this world of virtual assets now and do whatever you want, because there will be penalties, and they'll both be criminal and civil. So in many of the jurisdictions I've worked in, they have very robust legal frameworks. As I said, I first started doing this in Bermuda. I then moved to Mauritius. We in Mauritius wrote the first ever custody regulations of a digital asset, because custody of these assets is very difficult. It's not like holding gold in a vault or money in a bank. You have to understand very deeply you know, the cyber side, the security of these assets. It's a very complex ecosystem. So if you're going to get into it, you know, you need to understand cyber security risks and compliance very, very well. So that went well, and I think about 39 countries have adopted that. And now this brings me to my latest role with the Commonwealth Secretariat of writing a model law that we can use across 54 countries of the world, which is a third of the world's population, which all have the same law system. The US have a different law system to Europe. We as the Commonwealth have common law, and I think that's the most gravitating thing that we can have as a group of countries, because we can write a harmonised legal framework that can allow countries to be very similar, and the industry to have, you know, legal clarity and move across different countries without the laws changing on them, or knowing actually what the penalties are if they do the wrong thing. So I think that's really important. You know, there's so much competitiveness in the industry, but I think competitiveness and competition are not mutually exclusive anymore. I think every jurisdiction can win if they have the right regulatory framework, but you just have to do so that you do it in line with the global standard setters, because we do not want to end up on a grey list by the FATF. Countries I've worked in that have been on grey lists, they lose their corresponding banking relationships, they lose their economic trade ability. It's a bad, bad place to go. So that's the highest level of regulation. So KYC, AML, CTF compliance, then complying with consumer, investor and fraud protection, which comes under the Securities Commission, and then complying with prudential regulations that is generally managed by the central bank. So that's what goes into a legal framework for virtual assets, and I'm writing at the moment for the Commonwealth, which Vanuatu will have, a taxonomy of terms, because I think it's very important that we now stop talking about digital assets, virtual assets and crypto assets, and have a unified global adoption of a harmonised taxonomy that is good for both governments and the industry. So I'm happy to share my presentation with it. I don't want to take up too much of your time talking to you, but I'm very happy to answer whatever questions you'd like to throw at me. you want me to sit on it? I can stand.
Thank you, Loretta, for the presentation. It's overwhelming, I believe. But at this stage, if you have any questions, we have the commissioner and also the Reserve Bank here just to sort of support the statement. But otherwise, it's question time. There's a lot being said this morning, so just feel free to ask any questions. And we are also here, the Supervision Department of the Vanuatu Financial Service Commission, just to assist with answering questions. Please ask questions.
Thank you, Loretta, for this very detailed presentation. Now, we were expecting a lot of questions, but it looks like everybody's expert, so there's nothing to ask. Yeah, so this is the opportunity, and again, I can see a lot of participation. Like we said, there's a lot of talks in the industry, a lot of development, but our focus basically to get this legal framework done proper. And that's why you can see a flavor of ensuring that the standards we follow the standards and now harmonization of all these jurisdiction, the Commonwealth. So I think there's a big assessment that is coming up, national risk assessment that is coming up. I think we want to tie this exercise in the process, and I think you can hear from Loretta. Our choice of selecting her in a way is the best because it's in terms of driving business at the same time all this compliance and standards. So hopefully when we have this risk assessment, we should be able to meet these standards. And FFC is part of the National Task Force, which Director Floyd is part of. One of in our latest meetings, this issue about citizenship and digital asset and all this came on the radar. I know the government is doing its best in terms of this citizenship, but FFC, we are working with the other regulators to make sure that we're growing this business, but in the right way. So that is how serious, and that's why we're bringing on board here. So now I'm trying to just buy time so we can.
Digital. Thank you, Loretta, for very thorough presentation. My question is whether or not there is a roadmap of what needs to be done and where are we going to be expecting to go to Parliament with the digital asset legislation.
Oh, okay.
Technology.
I will just start off and then the Attorney General can just assist here. We all already have provided legal drafting to the state law, but because of the cyber attack, a lot of this infrastructure information has been thrown away, and we have resubmitted all this submission to help them start with this legal framework. And now Loretta is coming here. I think many of you have seen the letter that we've sent to the industry saying a consultation process is going to take place. This is part of the start of it. So Loretta is here to introduce it, and then eventually we'll be coming to each of you to discuss, perhaps in a group or whatever, to actually consult, and so that we come up something that all of us can understand. But I'll let Attorney General, if anything he would like to add, but pretty much, I think, based on what the work that State Law is doing, will be supplemented with Loretta's work now that is with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I think as far as legislation is concerned, it's a work in progress. I think from our experience, since the COVID pandemic, we began to see discussions in this area becoming more frequent. I think it was during the pandemic that people realized that there's a lot of things you can do online, on internet, and so we've had discussions, we've had proposals come to us, can you have a look at this, can you do this, but our concern is that we want to have a robust legal and regulatory framework in place before we can introduce this out there in the market. So that is our concern, and as you know from Loretta's presentation, it would be really helpful if we have some sort of a unified. Of course, the details will be specific to each jurisdiction, but if we can have a common principle to work on, it will be really helpful. But yes, Commissioner, as far as legislation is concerned, it's a work in progress. Thank you.
There was just a question on who can be a VASP, or what you need to do in Vanuatu to be a VASP. As I said, we at the Financial Services Commission have been in this process for almost 3 years. We're far way ahead of many jurisdictions, and I think that's commendable to Vanuatu. If you go and read the guidance around who can be a VASP and who can't be, it's very clear, it's very guided on the regulatory requirements of licensees of VASP. So if you're already a licensee, say, of an FX business, it's just an add-on. If you're a new player to the market, I would read those regulatory requirements and the licensing requirements very carefully. It's a new class of licence, which the FSC will be looking at. In the case of existing banks, because often this happens to me around the world. So in the case of stable coins and DeFi, and I think the interesting thing here, one thing I didn't talk about in my presentation, but I will bring it up because it's very important. So we've seen over the last 18 months this rise of AI. I don't know if any of you have used GB Chat. It's terrifying. And we've known about this for 10 years, but for some reason all of a sudden now the world's going, oh, we need regulation. We should have been thinking about this long before. What we've seen in the last 6 months is this emergence of what we call Web 3. So Web 1, as I told you about the internet, was the ability to move information across open systems. So we effectively condensed the world into a very small village overnight when we created the internet, because we could move information extremely quickly. But the internet is not secure. And as I said to you, I know Bob very well. When he built the internet, he was told not to add a security protocol layer into it. So the internet, as you all know, is very insecure. But blockchain came along with the first inception, and Bitcoin added a security protocol into the internet, which is probably the most fundamental thing that Bitcoin did, if I be honest. It made the internet movement of information secure. So move to today, we have what we call Web 3. And this, I think, is really interesting for emerging markets. So we can now transfer information and value across open systems. By 2030, we've done a lot of research here, Africa, the Pacific Islands, India, every kid under the age of 30 will have 2 lives. They'll have a digital twin and a life in the real world. I find it very hard to live in this world on my own, but that's just me. But my digital twin will be able to do everything that I can do in the metaverse. You might have heard about the metaverse. So we need to have rules and regulations about how this digital world works. And what is the one fundamental thing that is going to combine the real world and the virtual world? It's a digital asset, because the transaction layers can't be done in fiat money. And it will be done in some sort of a digital asset between this world and the virtual world. And we have to have a highway that is regulated. I had a call the other day from Interpol. Interpol said, Loretta, we're very worried about the metaverse. We're opening an office. what we're seeing around money laundering and terrorism financing, people moving tokens in the metaverse, washing them back into the financial system without any AML, CTF or KYC rails is positively terrifying. So we've got a long journey to go down, but we must be slow, and I thank the Attorney General's Office for helping us in this process. We have to ensure as a jurisdiction that we don't allow the nefarious actors to come in. We have a sensible and robust regulatory and legal framework that harnesses this opportunity of innovation and this peer-to-peer technology, which is changing everything that we do in our lives. And it's a massive opportunity, but we have to ensure that we do it with all the right guardrails in place. And I would say if you're a bank, many banks are looking to be VASP. So I think I was in a meeting with Jamie Dimond a couple of months ago, who runs JP Morgan at the Bank of England, and he looked at me and he said, "Loretta, I'm not a bank anymore, I'm a technology company." Well, you could have knocked me over. So I think if anyone has got a prudential banking regulation and they want to be a VASP, they'll have to get permission from the central bank, and then they'll have to be licensed under the Financial Services Commission, because that will be the license, and the licensee requirements will be under the FSC, not the central bank.
Vice Chancellor, do you have a mic there? Yeah.
So there's very few legal frameworks around the world in the region. Singapore's got, the MAS have got a very comprehensive framework that they've had in place. AML CTF, of course, was their number one priority. Australia doesn't actually have anything. We don't have anything in Australia. So I think Vanuatu can be very progressive and lead the region. As I said, the island states I've worked in tend to be more innovative and progressive than the large legacy systems that we see in the big countries, where it's, in the US they still use checks. So getting any sort of legal framework in the US is going to be almost impossible, because you have state regulation and federal, and they can't agree. The regulators in the US can't agree who's going to control it. Gary Gensler, who runs the SEC, thinks that everything's a security, and if you understand this technology, it's not. The European Union have come out with a bill called MICA, which is a very comprehensive legislative framework, but it has a lot of flaws. I think when we look at this industry, if I, as an individual, hold a wallet, so my digital asset I can hold on my own, there's what we call cold and hot storage. I could hold it on my phone, a device. I could actually hold it offline. They're now saying that you won't be allowed to do that as an individual. You'll have to do it through a regulated exchange to do so. So custody is very, very important. I do think Bermuda and Mauritius, you've probably never heard of them in the news. I mean, the jurisdictions that haven't had robust frameworks, like you've probably all heard of the FTX calamity last year, when one of the biggest crypto exchanges in the world, they were in the Bahamas. They had a very, very loose regulatory framework. FTX could have been trading jelly beans. It had nothing to do with Bitcoin. But the governance and the regulatory oversight by the regulator and the poor management of that company saw it lose $7 billion. Now that has ruined the reputation of the Bahamas as a financial centre. It has destroyed what took 25 years to build, got destroyed by one Ponzi scheme. We can't have that happen in Vanuatu. We've got to be very, very mindful of ensuring that the actors that come into the space understand their requirements and they're happy to be regulated. I think that's the number one priority. And you know, if you look at last year, there was another big incident in the ecosystem, was when one of these stable coins, it was based, and it wasn't a stable coin. It was called an algorithmic stable coin, which was based on a basket of cryptocurrencies. Most dangerous thing I'd ever heard is working in financial markets. It blew up and it lost about $5 billion. So because of low regulation and proper mismanagement in the ecosystem, it's taken a long time to get to be mainstream. But if we are going to be mainstream, then proper regulatory and legal frameworks have to be in place. And I think the entire industry recognises that. But to attract the big players that see Web3 and DeFi, and to allow some of these smaller companies that come from the emerging world to have the ability to grow and become the next unicorns. The Facebook, Googles, all the Web 2 level companies that we saw that made billions of dollars, those days are gone. Now we can see unicorns come out of jurisdictions like Vanuatu. Everybody has the ability to be an entrepreneur because of having a device in your hand. Companies can grow globally because this asset is decentralised. It doesn't live anywhere. It's borderless. So it comes with risk, but it comes with such opportunities, to be able to fund smaller companies. And I think Web3 is probably the most exciting thing that we've seen since the inception of the internet. This ability to transfer information and value across open systems to each other, to institutions, is going to change the financial landscape of the world forever. And it's going to change how we do financial transactions. It's not going to remove banks. And I think banks always say to me, we'll be disintermediated. Banks didn't disappear with the internet. They just closed their branches. They wanted online models. So I think in this new revolution with technology and digital assets, everything is about the consumer. The consumer is centric to every single transaction. And institutions may not like the fact that they can't make money out of friction in systems anymore, because that's what often middlemen do. You'll find new business models. Business models come out of innovation, but we have to make sure we have the framework in place to ensure that innovation's not stifled, but we stop the bad things happening. That was that question.
My second question is, if we are the first country to introduce this, or at least to drive it, are we equipped in terms of capacity building? What type of training requirements we need to prepare our people to making sure that if we introduce it, we have the legal framework, and when we run it out, that we have people who can assist to manage to making sure that we draw benefits from this. Thank you.
I think this growth of this ecosystem, it has to be collaborative. I have this hashtag collaboration is the new survival. Writing these legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks hasn't come out of policy writers. I've sat at tables with the deep cryptographers, the guys that come out of deep dark hacking, to sit with central bank governors and with prime ministers, because we all have to work together to do this. It's like the internet. The walled garden approach doesn't work. But I think, as looking at your education, I taught myself to code 10 years ago, and I was 43, so yeah, about that. And my 7-year-old, she learned to code with me, I think, and just off downloading an app on the app, I think our children understand risk better than we do as my generation. They understand technology innovation because they grow up with it in their hand every single day. So we can't be writing policies for myself or the Commissioner or the AG. We need to be writing them for our children and our children's children's. But we also have to be careful that, I think in the way that education is going, in things like the metaverse, we can now create completely new business models, and out of this new digital asset class will come new assets that we haven't even thought of yet. You think about 2 years ago, I'd never heard of decentralised finance. Now I've got every regulator on the planet telling me that I have to come up with a framework to manage it. You know, so this innovation moves so quickly. You can't be stagnant. We have to teach our children. We have to have industry and government collaboration all the time, constantly. The youth that are building projects, come in, speak to the Commission, tell them about your project. Don't be scared. I think the days when people think that regulation is an overall and it's just going to stop you is not correct. But it's a journey we all have to do together, and it doesn't come from policy writers or from the technology side. We all have to sit together. And our children, I go home at night and I often, my daughter's now 19, but since she's been 14, I'll go and ask her what she thinks of something when I'm looking to make a conscious policy decision in my head. Because if I go and ask my brother, who owns gold, I think he'd never touch a Bitcoin in his life, it's not in their realm. She's in the internet on her phone every single hour of every single day. You know, they're our equipped, next generations that understand that. So all of you that have got children tonight, go home and ask them: Do they play Minecraft? Do they play a lot of games? An interesting thing. When I was in Mauritius the week before last, the Prime Minister said to me, he said, I got home last night and my 16-year-old daughter asked me to go and tap up her Minecraft account, which involved me going with 500 rupee, which they have in Mauritius, to this man and paying for her to get tokens to play in the game. And he said he didn't ask me who I was, and I could have transferred maybe 10,000 rupee with nobody knowing who I was. And I said, yes, that's how this new system works. You put cash into tokens or into coins, and you interact in this new system. But you need guardrails, because people, in these games can't move billions of dollars. But money launderers and terrorists and nefarious actors understand technology much better than we on the good side do, and they work together much, much better than anyone on the good side does. So we have to make sure that we stop them being able to infiltrate into markets and infiltrate into jurisdictions to do harm.
Just want to add, I think this is one of the key challenges that we're facing. I'm glad that the Vice Chancellor has raised this. As FFC and the other institution, those developments are coming. We were in this IMF meeting recently in Fiji, and I think we have the Reserve Bank people here, but I think the point is, whether we like it or not, these things are coming. And we need to prepare and accommodative. And for us, we need to train our human resource. We need to partner with universities. We need to look at specialized skills. This afternoon, when we look at FDL, I know a lot of you will be sharing your experience, but one key factor is we are all facing constraint in human resource. For me, I'm really trying to partner and see if I can work with university. And I've spoke with the Vice Chancellor already, specific tailored qualification, industry focus. If Singapore, Hong Kong, and others can do it, it's because of the strong collaboration they have with industry and the institution. You can't get this type of qualification from just general management, economics, or whatever. You need specific tailored. And from time to time, we get, people from, well-skilled people who can come and assist. But this point is very important. FFC is trying to move forward, trying to embrace all this change, but all of us has to be in together. We need to talk to our kids. We need to think ahead that we can attract people here, but where are the people to take up this? So I think this is a good point. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Yes, I see.
And I just had one question to come in over here. It was, so what does having a legislation do for a country? I'll give you the best example in my experience. So when I went to Bermuda in 2017, Bermuda's a tiny island. It's a country of 60,000 people. Interestingly, it has the biggest reinsurance market in the world. Every third car in the world is insured in Bermuda. So when the Premier said to me, I want you to write this piece of legislation, I was like, well, I can't do it in a week, but we did it in 3 months. What did it bring to the country since then and today? It has brought some of the biggest players in the market to that island. They have a very robust regulatory framework. The Commission, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, is only small as well. But that's injected, I think, from now until the budget, which was released 2.5 weeks ago, over $1.5 billion into an economy of 60,000 people. So if you do this the right way and you have a framework that is solid and robust, you can attract the right players, and they bring the ecosystem with them. You know, it's maybe we'll run out of houses. I don't know, Commissioner, but that's an example. And on the other side of the coin is I would do a lot of work in Nigeria. I work with the Financial Intelligence Unit. We have a different situation in Nigeria. It's a 260 million populous country. It's the biggest in Africa. In 2019, the central bank governor banned Bitcoin, and he introduced a CBDC. We haven't talked about CBDCs today, but that's something else that central banks are looking at, imposing their own central bank digital currencies, which is just a digital representation of fiat currencies. Many countries are working on different use cases. I don't think in the future there will be one form of money. I think there will be private money and public money, and they will work very well hand in hand. So in Nigeria, they forced a CBDC. Interesting statistics on unintended consequences of not thinking through policy decisions correctly. 30,000 people use the central bank digital currency network today. Have a guess at the amount of peer-to-peer transactions that are done in Bitcoin because the market infrastructure of the banking system is so broken. It's almost 100 million people. So working for the Financial Intelligence Unit now trying to monitor the risk that we have of these peer-to-peer transactions in Bitcoin has become a very arduous task. But we also legislated and regulated this ecosystem under the Securities Commission. It was a bit difficult because the central bank governor was very anti it, but he doesn't have his role anymore. So in the last 5 days, I don't know if any of you read, but the Securities Commission of Nigeria saw that one of the biggest exchanges in the world, Binance, was soliciting business out of Nigerian residents and citizens and had no regulatory requirements. So they've been made illegal in Binance. That was their biggest market. 70% of their business was in Nigeria. So it's coming, and it's coming fast, regulation, and all regulators in all countries around the world are starting to work more closely together to ensure that we can manage the elephant in the room. And I was interviewed the other day in the Australian Financial Review, and I said, it's like having an elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, but it's there. And one regulator, is trying to cut off its ear, and the other one its tail, and somebody else its trunk. You can't do that. This innovation is here to stay, so we have to manage it, but we have to manage it in a way that is optimal for everybody and for the better of society as well.
that can happen, the land system in Vanuatu be transferred on a blockchain.
So we talked about Bitcoin, but we moved, that was the first ever blockchain that was created, the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's public. Anybody can go on to download the white paper of Bitcoin, join the Bitcoin network. And that's what we call a public blockchain. So everybody can use it, nobody controls it. And if we want to change the governance model of that blockchain, 70% of us in this room have to agree to do it. So that's what we call it. It's controlled by code and governance models. In 2012, another blockchain came along which didn't use any of the protocol requirements of Bitcoin, and that was known as Ethereum. So a guy called Vitalik Buterin created Ethereum in 2012, and he said, well, if we're going to be having this blockchain that will just move Bitcoin, what if I could create a blockchain that through a smart contract, a piece of code, we could move assets, any sort of asset, whether it be a real estate asset, whether it be a security, a land title, anything we could put on this blockchain. The issue is and the smart contracting was the one thing that Ethereum gave to the world. But there's also a lot of hype and a lot of promise in this technology. There's many cases around the world where people are trying to put real estate on the blockchain, they're putting gold on the blockchain, they're putting everything. You can put any asset on the blockchain, but many of these are not out of pilot processes at the moment because the industry itself and the technology is still really new. It's only 10 years in. People forget this. It took the internet, cryptography was around since 1946. Bob built the internet in 1973, but it took a mass adoption of that technology over 30 years. So we're still in the very immature phase. But the increase in the technology and the innovation in the technology is super fast. So there's a lot of countries that are seeing this asset tokenisation. That's what you're talking about, being able to tokenise any asset and put it on the blockchain because you've taken out middlemen. You can instantly transfer that asset with a piece of code doing the transaction. So these markets and these real-world asset tokenisation is probably the next phase of this. After we get the framework in place, there are blockchain protocols like Algorand. There's another one, there's Polygon. There's new blockchains that have been built on top of the Ethereum network since it was incepted in 2012, which are solving a lot of the problems that we saw with these early protocols. This stuff is very, very technical as well. If you've all got time, I'd tell you to go and read a book called The Blockchain Revolution by a Canadian man called Don Tapscott, which will explain in very simple terms what blockchain is and what its adaptations can be and where we can go with it. That's a very good book, I think, for general knowledge for everybody in the room to read. But this tokenisation of real-world assets is probably the next inflection. So when we write law too, and the Attorney General and I will probably have a long chat about this, laws have to be technology agnostic because they have to be technology agnostic, but they also can't be so stagnant when you've got innovation that is moving so fast. So you have to have abilities to have your exclusion clauses where one regulator might be regulating what we see at the moment, but when these new innovations and new assets are coming out of this ecosystem, we may have to look like stable coins. They should be regulated by the prudential regulator, not by the securities regulator. So we're seeing new assets now arrive on our doorstep and everything. Someone has to regulate them. Where are we going to put them? So we have to use the regulation we have in places that we can, and in places that we don't. Maybe in the Commonwealth, I work across Africa and India. Many countries don't have a Securities Dealer Act. Many countries don't have an up-to-date Securities Act. Many countries don't have an AML Act that's been updated for years. So we've got some countries like Australia that's very mature, that's got robust acts, but they haven't implemented any legislation, and they're trying to retrofit these assets into existing regulation and pieces of law. But not everything is a security, not everything is a financial product. So you have to now look, maybe we do need standalone laws that cover these assets in totality, but leave room for new assets to come in, but always be mindful that they need to be regulated by some oversight.
Thank you. I think it's a handful. It's very technical, but I think I'd say these are opportunities that Vanuatu can look into once we work in collaboration, set up the framework proper, and we slowly move forward. And you've heard about the potential Vanuatu can gain from this, but a lot of challenges, human resource and others. We are doing our part to help the country move forward in this direction. But I can see when we ask the questions, it's becoming very technical, but it's for the technical people that... Yes, there's a question somewhere.
Okay. As we've heard earlier, the Attorney General, and you said that we have legislation in place. So I have a question that has been at the back of my mind for a long time. And the question is, are there any tax considerations specific to virtual assets and transactions?
So the OECD, which is another standard setter or a policy think tank that I haven't spoke about, is that their mission is better policies for better lives. The OECD has come out with a very comprehensive, as has the IMF, taxonomy around taxing of these assets. That depends on a jurisdiction though. You know, some jurisdictions may choose to tax it, some may not. It may be capital gains in some jurisdictions it's not. It's classed as a property right. So yeah, that's for every jurisdiction to look into how they want to treat that. But there is comprehensive requirements for best practices, I guess, and benchmarking against what jurisdictions are calling these assets for tax purposes, or if they're not taxed, or how that works.
Just to add on, I think, as I've said, this is the start of the consultation. Eventually we'll get to the Reserve Bank, tax authority, and all these questions. Everybody will be, pitching in the concerns, the issues, and it is important that we understand the scope and everything before we finalize this framework. So I think it's good we're getting some of this reaction now. Yeah.
And I think one more important thing is also we look at data protection, because look at something like the travel rule. When you've now got to move financial data, just as SWIFT works because all the banks trust each other. It's a trusted system. But we're moving into the world of virtual assets. Nobody trusts anybody. These guys come out of many of them are hackers that have come out of the shadows. We're trying to put them into mainstream. So telling them that they now have to adhere to moving to understanding who is behind every, say, Bitcoin transaction, which is a bit of an anomaly. People think that Bitcoin's anonymous and that these cryptocurrencies are anonymous and they're only used for bad actors. They're not anonymous at all. And why? Because they're on a blockchain, an immutable, transparent ledger that all of us can see, so we can track and trace every single Bitcoin that moves. Cash, I'll tell you, we can't. So cash is probably the most decentralised asset in the planet because we can move cash around the world. They move it across borders to buy weapons and nobody notices. So for law enforcement purposes, Bitcoin's the best thing that they've ever seen because it's immutable, it's trackable and traceable on the blockchain. But the data protection side of this is very interesting. We have to make sure as jurisdictions that we include data protection in our laws, because in Europe they have very robust GDPR laws, data protection laws, but it goes completely against the inherent grain of what blockchain technology is. In Europe they have the right to be forgotten. You have the right to be forgotten. But with blockchain, you can never be forgotten because it's an immutable, transparent ledger that never takes any information off. So you have a complete clash now in Europe about how are they going to handle the data protection laws with blockchain and digital assets when they have a piece of legislation that says everybody has the right to be forgotten. So we've got to think about these things as well. I know everybody says, this is so exciting, digital assets, we'll just run and we can pull up a framework. I've been working on these things for over 10 years. It's such a complex ecosystem. It's very technical. There's a lot of innovation happening. You have to really deeply understand the technology, but also think about all those unintended consequences of having policy that doesn't think about all the different, things that go in to make this technology of digital assets so new and important. But the mass adoption of this is here. As I said to you, there's 100 million users of Bitcoin in Nigeria. Every single person across the continent of Africa has access to at least one mobile device. So that puts effectively a peer-to-peer bank device in every single person's hand. In India, mobile penetration is at 100%. You can do anything with a digital device, and we're seeing the uptake in the emerging world far, far greater than what they're doing in the US or Canada or Australia, because these young populations that have grown up with a telephone or a device in their right hands has completely revolutionised the world, education, financial transactions. And in the last 18 months, if I could tell you, the innovation I've seen in the last 18 months is probably more than I've seen in the last 8 years. So what's going to happen in the next 8 months, I have no clue, but I know that there will be something particularly big coming just around the corner. Maybe the second GBG chat is going to come out. So we have to look at AI too, because AI is used in a lot of these virtual systems. So the interaction of all these emerging technologies now, blockchain, AI, they're all converging right at the same time. So we have to be mindful to understand how they interact as well. AI is going to be very challenging, very, very challenging. But we have to think about that.
Just for your background, I think so much technical here, but just for everyone, we do have a provision, or there's a class. I think a lot of you know of that. This afternoon we'll be talking about the financial deals license. Class D, that's the category at the moment that we've, under the previous former commissioner of FFC, George Andrew, which is here, they've inserted that to allow for us to conduct this business. And FFC has laid out very detailed requirements. At the moment, we haven't licensed anyone yet. But business is quite big, so we are trying to take this out and put this in a new legislation, which can allow for cash pays and all these different type of providers to come and sit in well. There's a lot of potential there, but we need to put in place the proper legal framework. So I just want to confirm that we do have a license now, Class D, but it's quite stringent, and we have undertaken a lot of review with some submission. In order to get that license, it's quite hard because of the risk. But we want to make it friendly by taking it out and having a proper legislation, which is what we're moving forward. And like I said, it needs a lot of support in terms of resources as well. So Vanuatu, I think, I know there's a risk here, but we can all agree these things are coming. So we just can do what, and hopefully, like you said, Vanuatu can benefit more. There's a question on the side.
What you mentioned. Just one question that I would like to ask. I'm interested about this legal framework that will be coming into legislation soon. My question is, at the moment, the VFC is actually has the power to register the companies as well as issue the licenses. Would he also be will he also have the power to act as an arbitrator to look out any issues that may raise up? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Perhaps I'll assist. Yes, we act as a registrar of companies also. That is the traditional role. You all are aware of that. We register companies. But of course, for financial dealers, which the Commissioner has alluded us to, it's mostly international companies. We are mostly a supervisor with the stringent guidelines which the Commissioner has mentioned. So we don't act as arbitrators, but we mostly deal with the compliance of the licensed entities. And we have relationships with other agencies. So if there's issues of money laundering and issues which is in breach of the legislation, then we have an understanding with other agencies around the globe to sort of deal with them with regards to any breach of the law by, say, a financial dealer's licensee. So that is basically how our supervision department deals with all licenses.
Hello? Hello? My name is Simon Hodgkiss from Solaris Markets. We're a financial dealers and license holder. One of the challenges we've had here with that license is just getting local banking support. And I think with the digital assets license, that's also going to be critical to making a success of the licensing regime. So I'm just interested to know what support will be available to provide kind of traditional banking to the digital asset license holders.
Yeah, I'll just respond a bit and then Loretta can. I think these are some of the things that FFC notes. That's why it's very important that we work with the Reserve Bank and we learn from other jurisdiction experiences as well. Like we said, these developments are coming, but we need to clearly map out fiat money and digital asset and where things are. And like we said, these developments are coming, and I think Loreto can share some of the experience from abroad, how banks are able to work with the players. But this is something that we are aware of, and hopefully in the process we can come to some understanding of how we can do it better. But yeah.
Yeah, I think this is not just a Vanuatu problem, this is a global issue. So we've seen around the world what we've called the debanking of fintechs and players in the ecosystem. It comes down to with the banks, I think for a long time the banks have been, well, as I said, you know, they've seen this as a threat for the disintermediation, but as I had banks, like this technology can actually help you in so many ways, in back office functions. But at the end of the day, you know, a contractual relationship that happens between a bank and their customer. If the risk is not what they want, they won't bank you. And that's totally in a contractual way that banks operate with their individual customers. But I do a lot of work in compliance and risk management. I work with the FATF actually, with one and a lot of the big banks around the world, the global risk managers for financial crime. And banks do actually, like a number of the big banks, like say Scotiabank in Canada, have very good risk metrics about how, if they're going to take on a client in this ecosystem, what their risk appetite is and how they can measure the risk. So they do actually exist, and banks do bank this ecosystem. I always say to banks, you know, when does this ecosystem become so big, and it's over $1 trillion, when does it become so big that it's no longer a compliance decision but a business decision of a bank to bank this ecosystem? And we're seeing some of the big players, you know, they get banked, but they have very stringent compliance requirements for the banks that they use. There are global banks that are doing this. So not all banks are debanking it. I think in the US they've had issues around banks, and a lot of the rhetoric in the media has been that some of these mid-tier banks have been collapsing in the last 6 months because they were banking fintechs and cryptos. That wasn't the case at all. It was just that, you know, a lot of the prudential requirements since the GFC had been lifted by the past US government around around some of the prudential requirements of these mid-tier banks. So there are banks that will do it, but I think also it's good to get the banks together. As I said, I work with some of the biggest, the global compliance managers for financial crime in the biggest banks in the world, and they have very robust risk metrics models to understand if you do have the appetite to bank these systems. But we need banks. That's the truth be known. You still can't live your life in a Bitcoin. You've got to pay staff, you've got to be able to pay your rent, eat. All those things still require a financial institution, and we call these in the AML world the on-ramp and off-ramp. So we can control a lot of the bad things that happen, because there is still a great interaction between fiat currency and virtual assets per se. And there are banks that are doing it, but risk appetite of banks is all dependent on the individual bank.
We have Dr. Michael is from the Reserve Bank. He can maybe say some remarks here.
Available. Maybe I can just do some brief remarks. The Reserve Bank is responsible for financial sector stability, and I know we work hand in hand with the VFC. And also I think another important institution that we all report to is the Financial Intelligence Unit, of the government. And I think what we at the Reserve Bank have been doing is to regulate, in terms of the Financial Institutions Act, these are standards set by the Reserve Bank and as well as the National Payment System Act, which came into existence in 2021. This Payment System Act touches on something called e-money as well. What I wanted to re-emphasize is what the head of the university, Jean-Pierre, mentioned to the fact that the need for well-regulated financial systems, financial sector, and I think it will be, under the VFSC, ensuring that this asset class is well-regulated, has the capacity to do it, and it will be responsible for licensing, it will be responsible for registration, it will be responsible for, I guess, oversight as well. We at the Reserve Bank, in terms of the national payment system, I think we will be coordinating. I think it will be important for us to coordinate, and I see this act coming into force at some time in future. I think there is need for more coordination. Where, for example, where does the boundaries lie? Things like stable coins. Is it a coin? Is it an asset? So who is responsible for this? Things like cryptocurrency. Is it an asset, and therefore it should be regulated by VFSC or Securities Commission? So this is where I think we will need to cooperate in future to set our boundaries, and so that we will have. But I think at the end of the day, we need to have a well-regulated framework. We know that this law will come into force as soon as national payment system has come into force, and then we will start to develop the policies, the regulatory framework, I think, at the next steps ahead of us. And I think that is the key thing. I think the next big thing to come, I think, is the regulatory aspect. How we will do it in such a way to both develop it, but also to well manage it. From the risk, I think we've seen cyber attack and recently, and it's just to having that well managed system in place and then develop the system as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have one more question. It's almost morning tea time. It's 10:30, so this will be the final question. But Loretta will be around for the whole day. She'll be instrumental in the afternoon session too, so she's around. Please.
Thanks. I'm not sure if my question is directly in relation to Loretta's presentation. It's more about the banking and FDLs, etc. I think from what Loretta said earlier, we are on various lists, the EU, FATF, etc. That's what is an issue for our banking system, and I think it's also part of the issue for FDLs to be able to bank in Vanuatu. It seems like it's like a kind of a vicious circle. Like if we have stronger legislation, then we should be able to get out of this list, which should enable banks to allow us to bank with them, basically. So I'm not sure it is necessarily, I think we have to work on our AML, and I think we have to work as a country with EU, with other institutions like this, to resolve these matters and then enable more investors, more players to come and invest in Vanuatu. Not really a question, I guess it's a comment, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's a very good comment. It boils down to, at the end of the day, these things are coming up. We're doing with all these AML issues, we are really stepping up and all this, but this business is coming up, and it's coming on the radar for next review. So before they start reviewing us, we're doing all this. We're not just saying, oh, there's news on the paper, this person is engaging in this, Vanuatu is on the list and all this. But what we can tell to the reviewer now, we're having this meeting, we're engaging people, we're doing this, move forward to have this legislation. And part of the process is engaging the former FATF secretary in the process, that they are the ones that have created the methodology to assess the country. So we are doing this in the process of really completing it. So hopefully when we get the assessment, when it comes to this area, they can see a lot of things that we do. And hopefully it's not like we run the thing before and then we go, oh, you haven't complied, so it goes into the blacklist and all this stuff. We would like perhaps not get into it, but unfortunately business is coming. So we'll just have to move forward and do our best, take the approach that will really help us to hopefully get a better assessment. But definitely all this issue and AML and tax, all this is an ongoing issue. I think Vanuatu is progressing, but it seems that the goalpost keeps shifting here and there. Okay, I think some of this discussion will lead into the afternoon discussion, so I encourage all of us to remain around. But for now, let's break for tea, and Loretta can, meet some of you and all of us, and we can discuss more. But let's have a break for tea. Thank you so much.
Warming, climate changing, cultures fading, drugs invading. I hear the voices of the youth screaming. They conversating about their lives and
you to note that our major sponsors, the booth around here, the gold sponsor is TMGM. Please take time to go and visit the booth and look at the products. We also have Titan FX there with James and his team. Thank you. Please take a visit to their booth and learn what they're doing. Thank you.
with them island vibe. Language small kind time. Danny's, beat long downtown. You make me champ. Steel blank got fun. Evolution, lifestyle, trending. Still they got Chinese. Never give up, never give up. Creativity, Solomon, Kanaki, Vanuatu, West Papua, Forest Range. Give me one people, give me one Salawada. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You, me, put the future. Blow my beginning and feel. You, me, sing together. You, me, dance together. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You, me, put the future. Blow my beginning and feel. You, me, sing together. You, me, dance together. You, me, Melanesia. Me heart and beat, long time down. You sing of me, more you blow and call. All on fire, remind them belong on good follow. Fashion values, custom comes that we make it. Melanesia. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You, me,
This.
blow my beginning and feel. You, me, sing together. You, me, dance together. You, me, Melanesia. Me heart and beat, long time. This sound help me, no more big one. So come to me, everyone. You listen, more kill it, Kampala, Alfala, every call. You need rebuilding, Melanesia. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You, me, build the future. Blow my beginning and feel. You, me, sing together. You, me, dance together. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You, me, build the future. Blow my beginning and feel. You, me, sing together. You, me, dance together. You, me, Melanesia. You me live with them island vibe. Language small kind. Danny's, beat long downtown. You make me champ. Steel blank got fun. Evolution, lifestyle, trending. Still they got Chinese. You me never give up, never give up. Creativity, Solomon, Kanaki, Vanuatu, West Papua, Forest Range. Give me one people, give me one Salawada. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You, me, build the future. Blow my beginning and feel. You, me, sing together. You, me, dance together. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, Melanesia. You, me, come together. You,
fashion, lifestyle, it endings, but still they got challenges. You may never give up, never give up. TNT, Fiji, Solomon, Conakry, Vanuatu, West Papua, Torres Strait. Give me one people, give me one. Salawa